The backlog. Whether you're a gamer like me, a collector, or you just have some passionate hobbies that start piling up after a while, you've seen a backlog before. You've felt its presence, and you're probably trying to ignore that presence. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself why you're ignoring that presence? Why you're ignoring the backlog? Like, what makes the backlog such an intimidating foe? Is there any way that we can overcome these backlogs? And the most important question I found, is the backlog even a problem? Well, you may not have ever asked yourself these questions before, but I have asked myself these questions pretty recently and decided that I wanted to talk about it and share with you guys about it. So let's talk about backlogs. Hello everyone, I'm Nathaniel, one of the hosts here at Rollsicle, and I wanted to jump in quickly here at the beginning before we get into the main part of this video to remind you guys just how much of an impact you have on this channel. Rollsicle is small, and it may be small for a while, but all of the growth that has happened and that's going to happen is because of you guys. So if you end up enjoying this video, please be sure to give it a like, and if you want to subscribe to the channel, that really does mean the world. Okay, back to you, Nathaniel. What were you wanting to say about backlogs? Thank you, Nathaniel, for such a wonderful transition. That's right, backlogs. So I feel like most of us have one or more backlogs in some capacity or another. Like, my worst backlogs are definitely video games and TTRPG books that I haven't gotten to like reading or even looking through, though I'm also pretty backlogged on Magic the Gathering and stuff like that. So really, I probably have quite a few. And today, I might be talking about just my gaming backlog, but I want to point out that everything I'm saying should apply to really any backlog that you have so shamefully accumulated. So, I am talking to you who's collected something, very, very strange that you still haven't gotten to. Whatever it might be, it's not my place to judge. Don't worry, you have no reason to be ashamed, right? Literally in the background of this video, you can see that mine is hundreds of games long and even more than hundreds of dollars deep. And I want to point out that this is just my PlayStation library and only one PlayStation account's library in that same vein. So realistically, it's not most of my games. So what exactly do I want to talk about today though, right? So I mentioned these questions earlier that I asked myself, but I actually want to break this video down into three major topics. Where did the backlog come from? How should we feel about the backlog? And what should we do going forward with the backlog? You see, once we answer those three questions, we should have the knowledge, the emotional regulation, and a plan to start showing our backlogs who's the boss. So let's get into it. All right, section 1. Where did it come from? Now, one thing that I want to point out with this video, I'm doing things a little bit differently. Those of you that don't know, as I mentioned in the intro, Rollsicle here is a small channel, but we're also experimenting, right? We've done a lot of different types of videos, but we haven't actually settled in on the exact type of video that we want to do with all of them. So if you watch the Thief of Joy video, which is by far the best video Rollsicle's ever put out in terms of how well it did, but also probably the one that I've ever put the most effort into, and the entire thing scripted. It's a beautiful 7-page essay that I am very, very proud of. And I went into this video thinking that I was going to script it in the exact same way, but in talking to Ashley and just kind of milling over it myself, I decided that I'm actually going to do this in terms of bullet points so that you can actually get more of what I sound like when I'm just talking about a topic. So bear with me. I'm going to get to the topics. I'm going to be talking about the topics, but it's going to be on a bullet point basis. So back to what we were talking about. Where do the backlogs come from? So this is actually something that I did a little bit of research into, right? So I wanted to know, where do these backlogs come from? And it's actually really interesting, at least I thought it was very interesting, that if your backlog has to do with something that you have to purchase, we find that the backlog tends to start and grow rapidly around the time that we get our first jobs. And that actually makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you think about the time before you had that job income, right, you probably still enjoyed whatever hobby it is that you're enjoying. Now, if your backlog is made up of a hobby that you didn't enjoy when you were a kid, this doesn't really apply, but if it does, just hear me out. You enjoyed that hobby. For me, I loved playing video games, right? I've always loved playing video games, but I didn't have a job. So
I would just bring home maybe a video game a month, one out of 2 months, something like that, and I would have to enjoy that game for the entirety of those 2 months, or at least I would have to enjoy that game for as long as I could, and then go back to enjoying the other games that I already had. So I learned to get the most out of every single game that I had. But then eventually, right, that attention and demand for time, imagine this is on a graph, right? That attention and demand for time gets replaced, or isn't replaced, but it's being challenged by a little income. So we have a great amount of time and a great amount of attention to give to gaming and not a lot of income to put into gaming, right? Well, then as we get our first job, we watch that income steadily rise, and it rises pretty quickly, right? We find ourselves with a lot more what we would call disposable income, especially before we have proper bills to pay and stuff like that. And so what we run into is a situation where the money that we're bringing in and the ability to buy games now skyrockets. And at first, it catches up to the amount of time that we have to put into games, and it feels incredible, right? Every game that we could ever want, basically, right, as we're wanting them, we purchase, and then we play them, and it's great. But eventually, if you're imagining this graph with me, right, those lines actually cross. And when they cross is when we run into the backlog. Because once we have more money that we're dedicating to games than we do time and energy and attention that we're dedicating to games, that's when you run into a backlog, because you're purchasing games that you're not actually putting the time into to play. And I actually think when you look at that from a graph perspective, the ideal situation would be to ride that line. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more in the future. But what really happens is you're on that line for however long you're on that line, and then eventually you buy your first game, or you buy your first CD, movie, book, whatever it is that your backlog is, and you buy that first game that you look at it and go, I'm going to get to you later. And thus the backlog is born. And realistically, you get to that game, movie, book, music disc, whatever it is that you're backlogging. You do get to it. But by the time you do, you put 2 or 3 more things on the list. And by the time that you get to those 2 or 3 things, which you actually get to, you've put 6 or 7 more things on the list. And who knows how many times you've actually gotten to everything that was at one point on your backlog, but at a certain point, you got to games that you haven't even gotten to yet. And it went from 4 or 5 or 6 to 12 to 30 to 100 to 170 and counting on this backlog. And maybe it's not that bad yet, but for me, it totally is. And then you're lost, right? You're just overwhelmed by the backlog. And I think that there's also other things that contribute to this, right? So that's kind of where it came from. But what contributed to it coming to be such a problem, right? Well, one of the things that I wanted to point out was sales. You see, most of us don't have an issue thinking about, oh, I don't want to buy this game and I'm not going to play it until I'm going to play it. I'll just buy it then. If it's going to be $70 then, or if it's going to be $70 now, I'm just going to buy it when I'm actually going to play it. And that's an easy mentality to have. It's pretty easy to get into, right? But more often than not, where we get caught up is in a sale, because then we start telling ourselves, well, what if when I want to play this game, it's not on sale again? And then I have to pay $70, or I could pay $45 right now. And I could save future me $25 in case it's not on sale. And we actually convince ourselves, like we talk ourselves into thinking that that's a good idea without really putting much thought into what the other outcomes could be. Like, yes, there is the opportunity that it's on sale now, and then you want to play it in 3 months, and it's not on sale 3 months from now. And so now you either have to wait for it to go on sale and not play it when you wanted to play it, or you have to buy it at full price. But there's also so many other situations. Like, what about you bought it for $20 off at $50, and by the time you actually get around to playing it, it's even more off. It's $20 more off, and now it's only $30. Well, you ended up spending an extra $20 on a game that you didn't even play. Like, you're looking at that basically $20 to say, I owned it. for an extra 5 months that I didn't play it. I paid $20 to have the ability to play it and didn't play it. And that's not worth it, right? Like, that's totally not worth it. And what about the fact that it might be on even more of a steeper sale, or you might not ever get to it, or you may never actually want to play it. You might have just been happy to see that it was on sale and getting yourself worked up into playing it. These are all possibilities, right? These are all ways that we convince ourselves to pick up these games, and they're just not good. And I think that there's about 2 other major ways that we contribute to backlogs, but I do think that succumbing to sales is probably the biggest one. The other 2 ways that I see people contribute to their backlogs is, one of them is a mentality thing, and it's the mentality that bigger is always better, and that's definitely not true. I definitely think that we convince ourselves that it is in a lot of ways, if you know what I'm talking about, but realistically, it's not, right? Bigger is not always better, and there's a lot of things in life that you would rather have quality over quantity. And I think that in most cases of backlogs, when you look at like video games and when you look at movies, books, all sorts of media, I would say media in general, it's generally better for you to have quality media over just quantity of media, right? And the same thing is probably true for other forms of backlogs. So I want you, and of course myself, right, to get out of the mentality that bigger is always better. Bigger is not always better. And the last way that I think we contribute to our backlogs, and this is going to be very specifically for like media, again, is going to be what I'm focusing on here, and even gaming in general, but even just focusing on media, is subscription services, right? Because subscription services are essentially backlogs that we're buying into, right? Like, can we talk about that for a second? Subscription services are basically just offering you to pay a monthly rate to gain access to a backlog. And that's just bad, especially if you already have your own backlog that you're trying to tackle. The last thing that I need is a secondary side backlog just for me to have a harder time completing my primary backlog. Or even worse, I just focus on the secondary backlog, which isn't getting any smaller because they update those things out of our own control, right? So, moral of the story there being, I think that subscription services, while are certainly great, are only great for certain purposes, and those purposes are definitely not if you're feeling bad or bogged down by the fact that you already have a backlog with the associated media that you're buying the subscription service for, right? There's nothing wrong with having a Netflix account, and it actually can be a great thing. But if you feel bogged down by having too much to watch, then it's probably not a good thing to keep your Netflix subscription, right? So those are kind of all the reasons that I think the backlog came into be. But that doesn't answer most of what we're talking about. That really just gives us a brief history, right? So let's move on to the next section. Okay, so this section gets a little bit more personal with it, right? How you should feel about it isn't really something that I can tell you, but I can tell you how I feel about it, and also some questions or some things that you should consider about how you should feel about it. So the first thing that I want to point out with this section, how should you feel about your backlog, is actually the title of the video. Your backlog doesn't control you. And I want to expand upon that and actually say your backlog doesn't define you, right? There's nothing wrong with having the backlog that you have. Now, if you feel bad because of the backlog that you have, then you should do something about that so that you feel better, whether that be a change of mindset or a change of the backlog. But you should not feel bad or let the backlog make you feel bad if it's something that you actually don't have an issue with. So the very first thing that I want to point out in this section is you need to decide what you think about your backlog outside of what other people are telling you. Right? So if I have a ton of people telling me that I need to finish my gaming backlog, that's great. But do I actually want to finish or make good progress on my gaming backlog? That's the question that I should be asking myself right now. For me personally, the answer to that question is yes. Like, I want to make progress on my gaming backlog, so I should make progress on my gaming backlog, and I should make a plan, and we're going to get to all those things, right? But if you have a gaming backlog, or if you have a TV show backlog, or a movie backlog, or a book backlog, or whatever it might be that you have, and you don't have an issue with it, then don't feel like that you have to change that for anybody. It's not anyone else's problem, and it does not define you. It should not change your relationships. It is not a problem, and it does not control you. A backlog does not have to be a bad thing. And if it's something that you actually enjoy, that you're excited about, or that you're even proud of, you don't have to get rid of it. Right? I'm going to repeat that part. You don't have to get rid of it. If you decide that you want to get rid of it, then we'll be moving on to that in the next section. But you don't actually have to get rid of it, and it does not have to be a problem. Okay, so hopefully you're kind of caught up with me. We're on the same playing field. I want to actually do something about my backlog, but if you don't, that is okay. There's still going to be some actions for you to take in this next part, but you're not going to need all of it, that's for sure. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being happy or even being excited or even being proud of your backlog. But proud of the backlog is where I want to make my last point of this section, which obviously is not going to be that long of a section. If you are a collector, that is not the same thing as having a backlog. You see, I actually realized the difference a little while ago when I was thinking about my dad. You see, he got rid of a bunch of D&D stuff, old D&D stuff, that he told me that he bought to play. And I was like, of course you bought it to play. What are you talking about? That's why we buy everything, right? We buy games to play, we buy movies to watch, we buy books to read. And I realized that that's not actually true. Like, he bought it to do the thing that it was intended for, like most of us do with media. But there are things in his life that he might have bought for that purpose somewhat, but he also bought for the purpose of collecting. He bought for the purpose of having that item. And it meant something to him that he had those items, right? It was worth something to him that he had those items. But with the D&D stuff that he was selling, it wasn't worth it to him for him to keep those. They didn't mean anything for him to just have. They were something that he intended to use. And once he realized that he wasn't going to get use out of them, he was happy to get rid of them because he didn't need them anymore. Now, personally, with a lot of things in my life, that's not how I feel about it, but I have to separate the fact that I like collecting things from what is actually a backlog. You see, I have a lot of Commander decks, or I have a lot of D&D books, or at least just TTRPG books in general, and most of those, especially the TTRPG stuff, I may never get to, but I bought those because I want to have them, I want to collect them, and I like collecting them. That's not a backlog. The backlog of my TTRPG books are the books that I actually intended to read, are the adventures that I actually intended to run, are the lore books that I actually intended to dive into and understand their world and all of those things. Those are what contribute to the backlog, not the, oh yeah, I bought these 10 books just so that I would have the complete series of those, if that makes sense. Okay, so if you're collecting something, I would appreciate you finishing out this video, but just know that I am not talking to you about your hobby of collecting something. That is completely different than a backlog. A backlog is not only a collection of something, but a collection of something with an intended action to be taken with those things that you have fallen behind on taking. All right, so hopefully at this point, you've kind of decided how you should feel about your backlog, because I can't tell you how to do it. But I can tell you to consider whether it's not even a bad thing for you, whether or not you want to change it, and what you might want to do about it, how much you want to change it. Those are the types of questions to be considering. And once you've got those down, once you feel confident in those, we're ready to start taking action, and we move on to our final section. All right, so what should you do about it, right? It's time to take action. It's time to decide, what do you want to do about this? And based on that, I'll kind of tell you where I think you should go with that. What are some pointers? What are some tips that can get you to where you want to be? So the first thing that you need to decide is, do you want to get rid of your backlog? Or at the very least, maybe we shouldn't even be using the words get rid of, make progress on it, shorten it, and hope that one day down the line, you either don't have one or it's significantly less intense, right? I have hundreds and hundreds of games. I don't think I would be bogged down by a backlog of 10 or 15. So
what do you want to do about it? You don't have to do anything about it. And if that's you, thank you for sticking through this video. If you want to watch the rest of this, that means the world to me. But this is where it ends for you. If you don't want to do anything about it, I'm so glad that you came to terms with that. And I want you to keep that in mind anytime someone tries to tell you that you need to do something about it, because you don't. You don't have to do anything about it. And you should have that confidence. You should have that security in the fact that it's okay to have a backlog. And it's okay if you don't want to not have a backlog. But if you do want to get rid of this backlog, or you do want to shorten it, there is good news. You can. And I'm going to give you a couple of strategies that I think are going to help. And then I'm going to go over my plan, because that's actually a big part of why I'm making this video. So let's say you're like me. Let's say that you have a backlog, and maybe it's video games, maybe it's books, maybe it's movies, TV shows, whatever it is. Step one, it's going to sound simple, is to just start making progress. I mean, just start doing it, right? Just start watching, playing, reading, whatever it is. That's step one. And it's easy. And we all know step one. Now, step two, stop extending the finish line. Or I'm going to say, stop extending the finish line needlessly. Okay, so here's a couple of examples of this. Stop buying more games that you aren't going to play. If it's video games, stop buying more books that you're not going to read. Stop buying more movies that you're not going to watch. What I want you to do, and what I'm going to try to do myself, and we'll get to my plan more specifically, but I'm going to try to do myself, is to only buy things that I can tell myself when I'm going to play it. I don't have to play it right away, but telling myself I'm going to play it someday in the future is not good enough. If I know I'm going to play a game in October and I want to buy it while it's on sale in September, fine. But if it's on sale in September and I'm just going, oh, I want to play this someday, it'll be on sale again someday. I'll get another chance to buy it someday. So stop extending the finish line needlessly. Now, I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. When Spider-Man 3 comes out, I'm going to buy that game. And it's not going to be needless, because I'm going to play it as soon as it comes out. That's not contributing to the backlog, or if it is, it's contributing to it meaningfully. Stop buying things needlessly. Okay, step 3. Have a purpose, have a plan, but be willing to improvise. Okay, now hear me out here. Okay, you should have a goal in mind. You should track that goal that you have in mind. You should have a plan for how you're going to tackle this thing. You should have a purpose for why you're tackling it that way. But all of this should be loose enough that you're allowed to improvise, that you allow yourself space, that you allow yourself to change things. And this is the most important reason why. This is the last thing I'm getting into before my plan. I have attempted to get through my backlog probably 5 or 6 times before, and every single time I have failed. And I think this reason right here is why. Every single time that I have tried to finish my backlog, I have felt forced into playing or doing things with these games that I did not want to do. I felt forced to track them in a way that I didn't like tracking them. I felt forced to play them for an amount of time that I didn't like playing them for. I felt forced to complete them to an extent that I did not want to complete them to. And so much more. And every single time I failed. So when I say give yourself room to improvise, I mean, and I'm going to use a video game example here, be willing to give up a game you're not having fun. You finished it to the extent that you wanted to finish it. You're done. You don't need to actually finish that game. Or if you're going through your list and you had a game planned to play in October and you get there and you go, I'm just going to take this off the list because I'm not interested anymore. You finished it. It's done. Did you make progress on the backlog? Yes. The backlog is a list of games that you want to play. So if you have come to terms with the fact that you don't want to play it anymore,
You made progress on the backlog. I've watched a lot of videos about backlogs and stuff, and a lot of it was just for kind of personal use, but also a lot of it was in kind of research for this video. And almost every single one, they are hardcore pushing to not give up on games, that it doesn't count if you didn't complete it, and to track how many you completed and all of those sorts of things. Don't focus on completing it. Focus on making progress on the backlog. And the backlog is a list of games that you want to play. So if a game has gone from want to I don't want to play it anymore, you made progress on the backlog. That is a game that was on the list that's not on the list anymore. And that's okay. Because the most important thing is to have fun. We don't have hobbies because we don't enjoy them. We don't have hobbies because we don't have fun. We don't have hobbies because we don't want to do them. Make sure that when you're tackling whatever backlog it is that you're trying to tackle, that you're having fun. And that's not just in the doing of the backlog. So let's say I'm doing video games. I don't want to just have fun playing the games. I want to have fun talking to people about the games. I want to have fun tracking my progress through the backlog. I want to be excited and have fun planning out what I'm going to play next. If I'm not having fun with that process, it becomes work that I paid for this hobby just so that I could not enjoy it and slog through it like it's work. I don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that, right? So, based on everything I just said, you should have your plan. So now let's talk a little bit about my plan. So I've wanted to complete my backlog for a while. And if I'm being realistic with myself, I know that it's a many year process, right? Like, I've tried so many times before, and I'm confident that this is going to be the one. And with that confidence comes knowing that this is going to take forever. Like, I have attempted before and gotten, 40 or 50 hours into Breath of the Wild just to, if I want to play that game again, I'm probably going to have to restart. Just because for me, I like to experience the game as a whole. And that's okay. So I'm going to attempt the backlog again. And I'm quite determined to get through it. I'm gonna start making progress. I'm going to stop extending the finish line needlessly. I'm gonna stop buying these games on sale unless I know when I'm gonna play them. And I mean, I can tell you the days that I'm gonna start playing this unless some crazy thing comes up. I have a purpose, I have a plan, I know how I'm gonna track it. My purpose, slowly work through the backlog while having fun. My plan, play these games on stream, play these games in my free time. And we'll get to that stream part in just a little bit. And the willingness to improvise. I don't like a game, I'm willing to get rid of it. I'm willing to say, I'm done with this game. I gave it its shot. It wasn't fun. I know I spent $15 on it however many years ago. It's okay. It's okay. So let's talk about the rest of that plan. So my goal is not a specific number of games completed. My goal is not a specific number of hours played. My goal is simply, I want to have fun, and at the end of next year, be able to make a follow-up backlog video where I'm talking about all of the fun and experience and the process and everything that went into this, and probably have learned quite a few things from it. I'm excited to make that video next year, and I want to make sure that I've actually made progress since then. But knowing that I plan to make that video, and knowing that in this video I'm talking about that video, gives me incentive to actually get things done along the way. So here's the full laid out plan. I plan to play things at my own pace, and I might finish some and I might not finish some, and that's okay. I have an app I don't remember the name of right now that I might track them on, but I'm also going to create a publicly viewable Google Sheet where you guys can see the games that I'm finishing, what day I started them, what day I decided I was done with them for whatever reason, and then simply a description of how I felt when I was done with it, whether that was when I was done with it from beating the game, when I was done with it from completing the game, or when I was done with it from giving up the game. I just want to know what I was thinking at that time.
And that's going to be the entirety of how I'm tracking it. I'm not going more in depth than that because I want to make sure that I'm still having fun. One last strategy that I forgot to mention when I was going through what you should do about it and how you should feel about it and all of those things is that you also want to try to avoid these like live service endless games. They can be really fun, and I am a massive fan of roguelikes, which is basically the entire point of them, right? Is that they're kind of endless. You can play them. I'm gonna play them. I'm gonna keep playing them, but I'm going to play them more with a purpose. Why am I choosing to play more Gungeon and not get stuff done on my single player games? Why am I choosing to play some more COD and not get stuff done with my single player games, right? And depending on the answer to that, that's okay. If I'm playing COD because I want to hop on with some friends that I don't get to play with very often, great. If I want to play some Fall Guys because I'm getting to play with Ashley and I don't get to do that very often, great. There's nothing wrong with that. So, in summary, because I want to finish this video as much as you guys probably want to, right? I'm going to do my best trying to finish my backlog. But I'm also going to recognize that it's okay if I don't get a ton of games done. I have a lot coming up in the next year. Depending on how my life goes, I will probably be moving, graduated, starting my actual job as a teacher, and even more than all of that. So I know that my next year is going to be probably busy. 2025 is going to be a massive year for me. But I think that I can make some progress. And I know that you guys can too. So tune into that Google Sheet below. Call me out if in a year from now you check on this video, you see that, and I've done nothing. But I'm confident in both my ability and your ability to show the backlog who's in control. All right, thank you everyone who made it this far into the video. It really does mean a lot. If you guys did make it this far, go ahead and leave down that comment section down below the word backlog battles. That's what we'll go for. Backlog battles. Thank you so much. I wanted to quickly remind you guys that if you can like this video, subscribe to the channel. It really does change the trajectory of Rollsicle entirely. Like, this channel has grown so much, even in just the last couple months, I guess, since I said couple, but all of that has been because of you guys. So I just want to remind you guys that if you guys do that for the channel, it really makes such a monumental impact on this small channel. And I want to thank you for that tenfold. I also wanted to ask you guys, hey, what's your backlog made of and what are your plans to tackle it or not? Please leave it down in the comment section below. I love interacting with you guys and I can't wait to hear from you. I wish you the best of luck if your goal is to complete your backlog, but also I'm really excited to hear from you guys that want your backlog or that are excited for your backlog. I'm really excited to hear that perspective because I know that it's something that people might have, but it's not one that I have, so I don't really have that same take on it. And I'm really excited to see what that looks like. Either way, thank you so much for sticking through with this video. May the rolls be ever in your favor. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace out.